This conference kicked off this morning with Roger Langto and a couple other analysts talking about CASE. In fact, CASE seems to be the organizing principle behind this entire conference. There's this incredible nirvana that we're going to get to, which is autonomous ride-hailing, when transportation as we know it is completely disrupted, and it's more like how we're all listening to Spotify than buying CDs. There's a lot of work that's going to go into getting us from where we are today to getting to this future CASE world. But one of the reminders that I always like to think about is the massive wealth that will be created in this transformation. If you look at some statistics, the gray bars is the market cap expected of all automotive OEMs in their business of selling cars. The green bars is the market capitalization of all the companies that are providing mobility as a service. You can see in 11 years, the expectation is that the mobility service companies are going to have 6 times more value than the automotive OEMs do today. So that's the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. That's what everybody's trying to figure out, how do they get to. Now, of course, it's not just going to happen immediately. If companies decide to wait until we've got the right amount of level 4 autonomous and EVs are proliferating and shared mobility has become a thing that can be done easily, by that point, companies have missed the market opportunity, because there's a lot of work that you need to do today to get into the business to prepare yourself. So what people aren't necessarily talking about is what are the steps to get from where you are now to this $9 trillion of market cap. And it comes from what I call the triple disruption. This is TU, and so I think in some sense connected is already happening. We don't need to do anything else because connected is a prerequisite for shared, it's a prerequisite for electric, and it's a prerequisite for autonomous. So when we think about these disruptions, that when they all happen, it's going to change the world that we live in, we can start by looking at the phases with which we have to go through to get there. But the first one is shared. Now, when you think about sharing, car sharing is a classic case where the car sharing vendors typically own their fleets of vehicles. And I think there's a belief that autonomous ride-hailing services will be powered by companies that own fleets of vehicles, not companies that are bringing in the peer-to-peer model. That model works great when you've got people who privately own vehicles that are only used 4% of the time. There's some excess value in those that can be put to use in ride-hailing services. But the future here, when these things are going to have LiDARs and cameras and calibration, these are all going to be owned by the fleet operator. Car sharing today is the best path to get experience with being a fleet operator. So when companies come to us and say, how do we participate in this shared mobility revolution? They're looking at essentially 2 options. Should we go into business as a ride-sharing company, compete with Uber and Lyft? Or should we think about another option, like being car sharing? Now, if you're in the ride-sharing business, one of the key things that you learn how to do is recruit and retain drivers. Now, that's not a core competency that you need in the autonomous ride-hailing world. The other thing that you need to be prepared to do is lose money. If you've looked at the filings from Uber and Lyft, essentially they're stating that until autonomous ride-hailing comes and takes the driver out of the cars, that's really not a profitable business to be in. Correspondingly, if you decide to enter this shared mobility market as a fleet operator of car sharing, you learn how to manage a fleet. You learn how to onboard vehicles, how to keep them clean, how to maintain them. And you also are able to get into a business where you can make money. This is not a money-losing business. This is a business where there's profit to be had. So not only are you getting experience, but you're not plowing in billions of other people's money to do it. And one of the things that you can do by being a car sharing fleet operator is you get access to some early autonomous use cases that the ride-hailing guys just won't be able to do. So the next part, you've got a fleet of vehicles and you're operating car sharing. What about EVs? What's the role of EVs in car sharing? Well, one of the things is that if you are a fleet provider, EVs dramatically now will reduce the cost of operations. It's somewhere between 10 and 15 cents a mile cheaper to operate an EV than it is to operate an ICE vehicle. And as a fleet operator, those cents really matter. If you're a city and you're trying to figure out ways to get companies into customers buying and using EVs, getting a fleet operator to bring the EVs in means that as a city, you don't need to have charging infrastructure where the people live and where they work. Because it's the fleet operator that ends up being able to take these vehicles off-site and charge them in parts of the city where they have charging and cleaning depots where the power grids have some surplus capacity. So they have the ability to put charging infrastructure in where there's excess capacity and where the energy companies say, this is the spot where you should be doing it. So if you look at one of our customers, it's AAA, has a service called Gig. They started 2 years ago in the San Francisco Bay Area with 250 cars. They're hybrids, Toyota Prius C. The next year they doubled in size. They were in 5 cities, including San Francisco, and added a number of Prius. This year they made the jump and went with Chevy Bolts. So they now operate the largest all-electric car-sharing fleet in the United States, in the state capital of California, in Sacramento. And so this is a natural progression. Because EVs today are affordable at the 250-mile range limit, that completely transforms the economics of running an electric vehicle in a car-sharing operation. 2 years ago, the ranges oftentimes were less than 100 miles, and those cars were the most expensive to operate because they were always out of batteries. They were always having to send somebody there to pick them up, bring them to a charging station, and put them back, and after a day they run out again. So being able to get these longer distance vehicles, like the Bolts, incredible difference. In Europe, we have a customer, Renault uses their Zoe vehicles in Madrid, and they started with an all-electric fleet, 500 vehicles, and these vehicles are being rented like crazy, up to 10 times a day. And this is an example of where a city can really make a huge difference in the acceptance of shared mobility. Madrid said, anybody that wants to do car sharing, you have a permit. You're allowed as long as your vehicles are electric. You can park the cars anywhere you want for free. And in addition, we're going to make it incentivize our population to use them because we're going to draw a big circle in the old part of town that says no cars can go here unless they're EVs. So they made it cheap to enter, and they also made it, created some demand so that people, if they want to cut across town, they essentially have to use one of these shared cars or buy their own electric vehicle. So here's now where this intersects with the autonomous track. One of the things that we can be sure is that eventually we're going to get to this level 4, but we don't know when. And there's a lot of conventional wisdom that says, won't autonomous make car sharing obsolete? I mean, once the vehicle can drive itself, who needs car sharing? Because you just get in the car and go for a ride. That's actually true in the long run, but in the short run, there's a number of different technology use cases that show that having the technology and being able to use the technology aren't the same thing. So a year ago or so, San Francisco had the Scooter-geddon where all these companies dumped scooters all over the San Francisco streets, and for about 6 months people were using them in a relatively unregulated fashion, and the city said, hey, stop, take them all off. We're going to put up a process by which you can bid for the permit to use this. So 3 months later, they announced who won the permits, and they gave it to 2 companies, neither of which were actually on the streets beforehand. One of them is a company called Scoot that was in business for several years running electric moped sharing. And the city loved these guys because they'd been working in collaboration with the city. They knew the city representatives that were handing out the certificates. And so now the aha moment is, hey, it's great to be in with the city with something like a car sharing or a scooter sharing solution today so that when they hand out those coveted autonomous ride-hailing permits, you're not an unknown commodity. So actually getting and running car sharing services gets you one key piece of the puzzle, which is getting a permit to actually run your business. Now, it's not just getting the permit to do autonomous ride hailing that's going to be the end game. There are a number of use cases where autonomous can help people who are doing car sharing. So these are two words that you don't see too often together. Autonomous car sharing? What the heck is that? Well, it's low speeds. It's urban areas. It's level 4, but it's geofenced. The previous panel they talked about, yeah, there's just going to be a few streets that they're going to allow this. There's going to be some regulations, time of day. It's no passengers. What do you mean no passengers? It's things that car sharing companies are doing today where they're having to pay people to get in the car and move it. Those can be automated, and they can use these low-spec autonomous technology to take the cars from 2 to 5 in the morning. There's nobody on the road, different permit, no paying customer in the car, and use it to reposition the fleet. So that in the morning, the cars are in all the spots that people want them, not just the spots where the guy left them from the night before. If they're all going to be electric, well, what about having your fleet come back to the charging station, get topped off, get wiped down, and then get put back onto the streets? Now, one of the disadvantages of using autonomous to replace an Uber driver is that autonomous driving algorithms and what you can do with an autonomous vehicle isn't always the most efficient way. You can't make an unprotected left turn, so you're going to make a right and a right and a right and a right again. Well, if this is at 3 in the morning and there's nobody in the car, nobody cares. They can take the most circuitous but the safest route as long as the car gets there safely to its end destination and back. So you've got a situation now where the benefits of autonomous, getting the car safely from A to B, but maybe not the most efficient way, are something that will help the car sharing operator, but might not be good enough to run a full autonomous ride hailing service. All right, so then we have another interim phase. Let's say we're at the point where the cars can drive in the geofenced area perfectly. They're permitted to do it perfectly, except that they haven't issued any autonomous ride-hailing permits yet. Car-sharing guys have a use case that the ride-hailing guys don't. They can take their autonomous vehicles that have been repositioning themselves and turn them into a car-hailing service. So this means that instead of looking to see where the nearest car is and then walking 3 blocks to get it, you can just push the button and have the car come to you. So here's another autonomous use case that nobody's talking about, nobody's thinking about. We just skip straight to the end. And the reality is there's businesses to be made. There's market entry strategies to be done by adopting these interim forms of car sharing to help get the experience and help build up the expertise and the relationships that you have with the government. Coming and putting together car sharing operations, I think there's a conventional wisdom, and we've heard it in the morning. Roger Langto's up there saying it's going to be doom and gloom, everybody's losing money. And the reality is a lot of shared mobility companies think that all they need to do is create an app that locks and unlocks the vehicle and allows you to reserve it and collect money, and voila, you have a car sharing service. The reality is there's so much more sophistication into creating a service that not just works, that's delightful for customers and makes money. So there's 3 pillars to really making a successful shared mobility service. First is, it's kind of obvious, you need a great experience at every touch point, not just the app. Really need to focus on a high quality customer experience. You need to maximize the number of hours that these vehicles are used. You need high fleet utilization. Every hour that car sits idle is money you're not making. So finding ways to get those vehicles used all the time is a key part to making this a successful effort. And then finally, designing and running the business for peak performance. That's a high efficiency operation. The third pillar of these 3. And something magic happens when you focused on getting the most use out of the vehicle, making an amazing customer experience, and then figuring out how to automate and make your experience run seamlessly. They come together and they create high-yield shared mobility. High-yield shared mobility is what has to happen to turn your business from a shared mobility service into a sustainable and profitable shared mobility business. From a customer's perspective, what do I mean by high-quality customer experience? Well, it's having your customers say, I love that the cars are clean and ready to go. From a customer's perspective, they may say, it's like somebody knows when and where I need a car. There's always one ready. And now it's so easy to take advantage of my company's green commute program. High-quality customer experience means that you create a superior user experience from start to finish. Having smart fleet operations means that you know the cars that need cleaning and you clean them right away before there's any customer dissatisfaction. It's about understanding what customer segments are doing with your cars so that, if you have a shared fleet, people are using them to commute. So they're taking it in the morning from their home, driving it to work, taking another one from work back home. Understanding that person's commute pattern means that you can arrange to have a vehicle within a 2-block radius of that person's house because they're one of your key customers. Being able to take multiple user types using one fleet. So being able to go to a corporation and say, you have sustainability goals. If your employees sign up with their corporate email address, we can have a program that says you will subsidize them. Same fleet of vehicles, but me as a company member means that I get a subsidized rate than if somebody else just downloads it and starts using it. Being able to take that same fleet of vehicles and have different pricing for different times of day and different vehicle users. That's key. So that's high-yield shared mobility. When we think about high fleet utilization, our cars don't sit idle, yet always seem to be there when needed. To customers, it's magic. To us, it's mission critical. So by maximizing the number of hours and ways a vehicle's used, one of the key things there is by running multiple different kinds of services with one fleet. BMW is a customer of ours. We power their Reach Now service in North America. And they realized after having a car sharing service that's, the modern style, which is free floating, the one that lets you take it in this spot and park it in this spot, they realized that, hey, these cars weren't getting used as much in the evening. People like to take car sharing in the day. So they launched their own ride sharing service. Now with one app, you can press a button that says, I want to drive myself, or I want to get picked up. And it's leveraging that fleet of BMWs and Minis with paid chauffeurs in them. The ability to position your vehicles to consistently meet their demand and understand usage to tailor experiences to drive demand, like marketing campaigns that know that this person is a weekend user. They take it to Tahoe. This person is an errand runner. They haven't used it in the last 2 weeks. So then why not send out a marketing promotion that reminds them, hey, if you drive 2 more times, you get a third one free. Being able to really understand what your customers need and use their system for helps you tailor the experience to them. That's high-yield shared mobility. Finally, in the high-efficiency operations, we don't just gather data, we put it to work. It's how we run everything better. So designing to run the business at peak performance by automating these business operations, automating the fleet operations and rebalancing. So when you have, for instance, every vehicle in the fleet has a predictive model of when it's going to be rented next. And so by knowing that this vehicle's on the edge of the network, it's probably not going to be rented for the next 6 or 8 hours, the system can automatically put that one on sale, knock the price off by 20%. The vehicle can change color from blue to gold, so the customers who love a deal, everybody loves a deal, will walk an extra 5 or 6 blocks to take that car and bring it probably somewhere more desirable than where it is now. And being able to have a system that automatically is doing these things so that as an operator you don't have to think is a key part of running a high efficiency operations. Being able to integrate big data and analytics through a real-time data pipeline and integrating partners that are part of an ecosystem of companies like ours that have figured out how to run these businesses profitably, taking advantage of their expertise is a really key part of how you get from doing car sharing today to getting into the autonomous ride-hailing business tomorrow. That's high-yield shared mobility. It's about profit, it's about scale, and about creating demand. So just a slide or two to let you know who RideCell is. We are a company founded in 2009, so the last 10 years we've been in the business of shared mobility. The name RideCell started by getting a ride with your cell phone. So we've always been focused on trying to solve the shared mobility problem. We're headquartered in San Francisco, about 150 employees globally, have taken in about 80 million of funding. We're working with BMW, AAA, Renault and Ferrovial, Karma, as well as 18 other car sharing and ride hailing customers. We're the only company in the world that has a platform that lets you run a ride sharing service and a car sharing service all using one fleet. And because the goal of just about every company now that's getting into this business is how do I get to this autonomous ride hailing future, it really combines both car sharing and ride hailing. Because in the end, once we do pass through all these phases, and we get to the robo-taxis of the future and the operators of those, car sharing and ride sharing will effectively emerge together. What's also important is that it's not just about having the app and collecting money and having vehicle access. It's about having a fleet management solution that helps these cars understand how they can maintain themselves. Even in an autonomous situation where people are focused on teaching cars how to drive safely from A to B, they're not teaching the cars how to do their own maintenance, how to manage their own cleaning, or what happens when the sandstorm comes and they can no longer safely drive. This kind of solution makes sure that the appropriate people are called and these vehicles are running today in great shape. So that's us, that's RideCell. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Put up the slide on people. I got a question for you, Mark, while we see if we've got any questions. We do have a few.
Yes.
So, you got the platform, you learn a lot about the users and about the maintenance. I love the slide about it's clean, who thought of that? If I get, it just got dropped off by the previous rider and they left fast food wrap or something, cancel this reservation. Okay, so you guys know the information, you know what needs to be done, but how do you physically get it done? Who do you work with that actually comes in and does that cleaning service, if you will? Who is that kind of partner? Where do you get that?
So we are working with Cox Automotive. They're an investor. They have integrated our operations platform into their solution. And what our system does is it sends tickets and work orders to the companies that have been contracted to keep these cars cleaned and moved. So for instance, the guy who's got the app who's responsible for moving the vehicle, it'll give directions to how to get to that vehicle, and then they use the app to unlock the car because there's no one there to meet them. So that's all within the fleet operations solution that keeps these vendors who are contracted to do the work really with prioritized jobs and access to vehicles.
So it kind of happens on the street then?
Sometimes you have the vehicle moved for heavy maintenance, sometimes you do the light maintenance right there in the street.
Let's take this first one up here. I think it's a pretty good question. It's sort of comparing and contrasting private versus fleet car sharing. So do you think private car sharing could be bigger than fleet car sharing in the future, since our private vehicles are parked 95% of the time, assuming we still have private vehicles?
So I think that's the question. Once, there'll be an evolution. And at some point, as people start taking more and more shared mobility, they'll find that they use their vehicles even less than the 5% they're using them now, 4%, 3%, 2%. And potentially the car becomes just like that box of CDs that's left in your garage that you're not quite sure what to do with. And that's the point at which you give it back or you sell it, or when your lease is up, you decide not to renew it. As we get autonomous vehicles, and the prices potentially are much higher, and the prices of shared mobility services are much lower, there really isn't the need in an urban center to own the vehicle. So we believe that shared fleets are going to be owned by the fleet operator, and In the same way, I think if you look at what Waymo's doing, they're contracting with FCA and JLR to get cars that are optimized for their service, but they're the ones that make sure that the LiDARs are properly cleaned and adjusted and the whole thing's maintained properly.
Mark, we've run out of time, but thank you.